The first time Adrian Locke saw her, she wasn't a girl. She was a shadow. Through the carved lattice of a rosewood screen, he caught a glimpse, not of a face, but of a pair of eyes the color of old gold. They locked with his for half a second, steady and unflinching, before a silken veil slid down to hide them. It was the opening night of the Almasari auction in Cairo, a feast for the wealthy and dangerous, where fortunes were lost over wine and whispers. Adrian wasn't there for the artifacts, though the room glittered with gold, ivory, and relics worth more than empires. He was there for a map, a stolen chart rumored to lead to a vault hidden beneath the dunes. He'd been trained to spot liars, thieves, and assassins at a glance. But the girl in the silk veil, she didn't fit into any of those categories. She fit into none and all at once. Their first exchange wasn't in words, but in an exchange of glances as the bidding began. A carved scarab, centuries old, was placed on the stage. The crowd's chatter dimmed. Her eyes flickered toward him again, almost knowingly, before she made the first bid. Adrian matched it. She raised it. They weren't bidding for the scarab anymore. They were bidding for each other's attention. When she finally won the piece, the faintest curve of a smile appeared behind her veil, one that wasn't meant to be seen, but was. She rose, taking the artifact, and glided away through the hall like a wisp of perfume. Adrian followed. Down the corridor, past guards, through a doorway heavy with incense, he found himself in a private chamber lit by oil lamps. She stood at the far end, back to him, fingers tracing the surface of the scarab. "You followed me," she said without turning. "You wanted me to," he replied. Only then did she look over her shoulder, veil still in place, and say, almost like a challenge, "Perhaps. But tell me, Mr. Locke, how far are you willing to go for something that isn't yours?" In that moment, Adrian knew three things. 1. She knew exactly who he was. 2. She was dangerous. And 3. He was already in far too deep. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, multiple, hurried, armed. Someone else was coming for the scarab. The girl's eyes burned into his as she whispered, "If you want to live, follow me. But you'll have to trust me completely." Adrian didn't hesitate. He'd learned long ago that hesitation got you killed, and the footsteps in the hall were growing louder. The girl in the silk veil slipped through a narrow archway, her robes brushing against him as she passed. Her scent, something faintly floral but edged with spice, lingered in the air as she pulled him into the dark. They emerged into a kitchen stacked with copper pots and baskets of figs. 2 guards stormed into the room behind them, shouting in Arabic. She didn't flinch, just shoved open a wooden door at the back and stepped into the night. The alley beyond was a maze of stone walls and shadows. A single cat darted across their path as she took off at a pace that forced Adrian to match her stride. She didn't look back once. "Do you mind telling me who they are?" he hissed, vaulting over a crate. "They want the scarab," she replied without breaking rhythm. "And if they catch us, they won't stop at taking it." "Who are you?" The faintest laugh escaped her veil, soft, but with something dangerous underneath. "Someone you should have left alone." They reached the end of the alley. The way forward was a wall at least 10 feet high. She didn't slow. With a burst of movement, she caught the edge, pulled herself up, and turned to offer him her hand. "Climb," she said. He took it, and in that moment, her grip was firm, warm, alive. She pulled him up onto the roof, the city of Cairo sprawling out in silver and shadow around them. The night air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of jasmine. She started moving again, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, her veil fluttering like a banner. Adrian followed, adrenaline drowning out the ache in his legs. The guards below barked orders, their torches flickering as they tried to keep up from the streets. But the rooftops gave her the advantage. She moved like she knew every tile, every gap, every treacherous loose brick. Finally, she stopped, crouched low behind a crumbling parapet. Her breathing was even, while his was ragged. "They'll lose us here," she whispered, peering over the edge. Adrian, still catching his breath, said, "All right. You saved me. Now you can tell me your name." She glanced at him, moonlight catching those golden eyes, and after a moment, said, "Leila." It was a name that fit her. Beautiful. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Before he could say more, she reached into her robe, pulling out the scarab. She held it out to him, not to give, but to show. "Tell me, Mr. Locke," she said quietly. "Do you know what this is really worth?" A voice shouted from somewhere nearby, closer than he'd like. Leila tucked the scarab away again, rose to her feet, and smiled faintly beneath the veil. "We'll finish this conversation when we're safe. Come." And just like that, she was running again, a shadow against the stars, and Adrian had no choice but to follow. The Medina of Isfahan was a labyrinth of color, scent, and shadow. Every step Leila took felt like wading deeper into a dream. Woven carpets spilled into the streets, glass lanterns dangled like captive stars, and the air was thick with cinnamon, cardamom, and the intoxicating pull of mystery. She had promised herself she wouldn't look for him. She'd told her trembling heart that the stranger in the silk veil, Adrian, was nothing but trouble wrapped in poetry. But trouble, as she was discovering, was the perfume she could no longer stop breathing. The bazaar was crowded, but she could feel him before she saw him. It was in the way the hairs on her arms lifted, the way her steps slowed without her permission. And then, there he was, across a narrow aisle, in front of a stall filled with crystal bottles of amber oil. The veil hid half his face, but his eyes found her like an arrow. He didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he held her gaze for a heartbeat too long before turning away, vanishing into the maze of stalls. Leila's chest tightened. It wasn't an invitation. It was a dare. She followed. Twisting alleys narrowed to silent courtyards, the golden afternoon bleeding into violet dusk. The further she went, the quieter the world became, until all she could hear was the echo of her own breath and the fading whisper of his robes against the stone. When she finally caught him, it was in a small courtyard lit by a single hanging lantern. Its glow painted his veil in molten gold. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice deep, quiet danger wrapped in silk. "Then why did you lead me here?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. The corner of his mouth tilted beneath the veil. "Because I wanted to see if you'd follow." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them shimmered like heat on desert stone. And then, without warning, he stepped closer, close enough for her to smell the warm spice of his skin beneath the veil. "There are things you don't know about me," he murmured. "Things that could burn you." Leila's heartbeat was a drum in her ears. "Then maybe," she whispered, "I want to burn." A shadow passed over his eyes, part hunger, part warning. "Careful, Leila. In this city, nothing is as it seems. Even the person you think you're falling for." Before she could reply, footsteps echoed at the far end of the courtyard. Adrian's eyes darkened, and with a swift motion, he pulled her into the shadows of an arched doorway, one hand covering hers, the other slipping something small and cold into her palm. "When you're alone," he said, voice low, "look inside." But not before. And then, as the strangers passed, he vanished again, gone like a breath of wind. Leila opened her hand. It was a silver coin, etched with an emblem she didn't recognize, but one that would soon lead her into a secret that could shatter the city's underworld and her heart. Leila sat in her small, lamplit room above the spice shop, the silver coin resting in the center of her palm like it had weight far beyond its size. She turned it over slowly, the metal catching the light. One side bore an intricate sunburst, the other a crescent moon cradling a dagger. She'd never seen the symbol before. But something about it stirred a memory, like a half-forgotten lullaby. Against her better judgment, she pressed her thumb into the grooves of the dagger, and the coin clicked. A hidden seam split open with a delicate snick, revealing a paper folded so small it could have been mistaken for dust. Her hands shook as she unfurled it. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. A map of the Medina, but not as she knew it. This one marked secret passages, underground routes, and red X's over certain stalls. At the bottom, in handwriting she didn't recognize, 3 words were scrawled. "Find the lantern maker." The next morning, Leila moved through the bazaar with forced casualness, the coin tucked inside her sash. Every face seemed to watch her, every voice felt like it dropped into silence when she passed. When she finally found the lantern maker's stall, it was in the farthest, dimmest corner of the Medina, where the crowd thinned and the air was cool. The man was old, with a spine like a bent reed and eyes clouded by cataracts, but his hands moved with a precision that made her think he saw more than most. "You have his coin," the old man rasped without looking up from the glass sphere he was cutting. Leila froze. "Whose coin?" He smiled faintly, revealing only one tooth. "The man with the veil. The outlaw. The one they'll hang if the wrong eyes see his face." Her heart stuttered. "Why would he give it to me?" The lantern maker finally looked up, and though his eyes were clouded, they pierced her. "Because you're already in the fire, girl. And now, you'll either burn with him, or burn because of him." He set the lantern aside, then reached under his workbench and brought out a small glass sphere, no bigger than her fist. Inside it, a swirl of golden light moved like captured sunlight. "This," he said, "is for him. You will deliver it. And when you do, the two of you will be hunted by everyone in this city." That night, under a violet sky streaked with starlight, Leila walked toward the city's edge, the glass sphere warm in her hands. She didn't know if she was carrying hope or a weapon. But somewhere in the shadows beyond the gate, Adrian was waiting. And every step she took brought her closer to a man who could ruin her, or save her. The desert at night was not silent. It breathed soft sighs of wind curling over dunes, the shifting rustle of sand, the whisper of unseen creatures slipping through shadows. Leila's steps slowed when she saw him. Adrian stood with the moon at his back, a tall silhouette draped in black, the silk veil concealing all but the glint of his eyes. He leaned casually against a broken column, as if he hadn't been hunted across half the desert. "You came," his voice was low, almost amused. "I almost didn't." Her heart was pounding, but she kept her chin high. "The lantern maker said this is for you." She held out the glass sphere. His hand closed around hers, warm and firm, lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Then you've just made yourself my accomplice," he murmured. Leila tried to pull her hand back, but his grip tightened, gentle, but unyielding. "Why me?" she demanded. He tilted his head. "Because you looked at me differently than anyone else in that market. You didn't see a fugitive. You saw a man." Her breath caught. His voice, the heat of his skin, the way the moonlight pooled in his eyes, it unsettled her more than the danger. Adrian stepped closer, their shadows tangling on the sand. "I can't show you my face. Not yet. But if you trust me, I'll show you why the whole city wants me dead." "And if I don't trust you?" He leaned in, so close she could feel the faint brush of the veil against her cheek. "Then you shouldn't be here at all." For a long, charged moment, neither moved. Then he took the sphere, tucking it into his cloak. "Follow me," he said. "We're running out of night." They moved quickly through the crumbling ruins beyond the city walls, moonlight painting everything in silver. The night smelled of warm stone and dust, with the faint spice of the market still clinging to Leila's clothes. Adrian stopped before a narrow doorway hidden between two half-collapsed walls. He pushed it open with a muted creak, revealing a chamber lit only by a sliver of moonlight cutting through a high crack in the ceiling. "Inside," he whispered. Leila hesitated, her pulse hammering. "This looks like a tomb. It's safer than the streets." He stepped in, waiting until she followed before pulling the door shut. The air inside was cooler, heavier. Adrian lit a small oil lamp, its glow brushing over worn carpets, scattered cushions, and a low table bearing a map covered in strange symbols. He removed his gloves, the movement slow, deliberate. The lamplight caught the veins in his hands, the strength in his fingers. Leila tried not to watch him, but failed. "You keep staring," he said without looking up. She folded her arms. "I'm deciding if you're dangerous." Now his gaze found hers, and it was like being held in place. "I am dangerous. But not to you." Her throat tightened at the quiet certainty in his tone. "Why not?" He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to a breath. "Because if I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be wasting time, wanting you instead." Her breath hitched. The air felt too thin, the walls too close. The silk veil still covered his face, but she could see the shape of his mouth beneath it, the faint movement when he spoke. "Adrian," she began, But he was already pulling the veil slightly aside, just enough to reveal the strong line of his jaw, the shadow of a smile, the promise of something she wasn't ready to name. "You're in this now, Leila," he murmured. "Whether you run or stay, the choice will change everything." And before she could answer, the sound of distant voices outside the door shattered the fragile stillness. The voices outside were growing closer, deep, accented, speaking quickly in a language Leila didn't recognize. Adrian moved fast, snuffing the oil lamp until the room sank into darkness, the faint moonlight the only silver thread between them. "Come here," he whispered. She hesitated only a moment before he caught her wrist and pulled her into a narrow alcove between two ancient pillars. The space was barely wide enough for one person pressed together. She could feel every shift of his breathing against her ribs. His arm slid around her waist, steady but firm, his palm warm even through the thin fabric of her dress. The scent of leather and something darker, clove? Cedar, wrapped around her as completely as the night. Outside, footsteps crunched in the sand. Someone muttered. Then the sound of a blade being unsheathed. Her pulse was so loud she was sure they could hear it. She tried to pull back slightly, but Adrian's fingers found her chin, tilting her face up. In the darkness, she could see the faint gleam of his eyes. "Don't move," he breathed. "Not for them. Not for anything." Her lips were inches from his. She could feel the heat of his breath, steady, controlled, even as danger prowled just beyond the door. And then, as if the world had narrowed to nothing but the sound of their hearts, he leaned in slowly, deliberately, until his mouth was so close she could almost taste him. But he stopped, his lips barely grazing hers. "Not yet," he murmured, the words like silk against her skin. "When I kiss you, Leila, it won't be because we're hiding. It'll be because neither of us can stand not to." The door outside creaked, then slammed. The voices faded. Only when silence claimed the room again did he let her go, though his hand lingered on her waist longer than necessary. They didn't speak for several heartbeats after the danger had passed. Leila's back was still against the cool stone, but every inch of her front felt scorched where Adrian had touched her. He paced once across the small chamber, as if putting space between them could cool whatever had just ignited, but then he stopped halfway, as if deciding against it. When his gaze found hers, it wasn't cautious anymore. It was hunger. In 2 strides he was in front of her again. The distance between them collapsed like it had never existed. "You think I'm going to keep pretending I don't want this?" he said, his voice low and dangerous, like a blade sliding free. Her breath caught. "Adrian." The rest of her protest died as his mouth found hers. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that erased everything before it, the kind that demanded, consumed, and promised in the same breath. Her hands were on his shoulders without realizing it, clutching the hard lines of muscle beneath his shirt. His fingers threaded into her hair, tilting her head back just enough for him to deepen the kiss, tasting her like he'd been starving for far too long. When he finally tore his mouth from hers, it was only to press it against the hollow of her throat, his breath hot against her skin. "You're trouble," he murmured against her pulse. "The kind I can't walk away from." Leila's laugh was shaky, almost breathless. "You think you're any better?" He pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumb brushing her jaw. "No," he admitted. "But maybe we're exactly the wrong thing we both need." And then he kissed her again, slower this time, but no less claiming, while somewhere beyond the walls, the desert wind began to rise. By nightfall, the city of Kashira glittered like a crown of fire in the desert. The air was thick with spice, smoke, and the murmurs of merchants closing their stalls. Leila walked beside Adrian through the narrow streets, still feeling the ghost of his hands on her hours later. She had tried to tell herself it was just a moment, a weakness, but her lips still tingled, and the way he watched her, like she was the only thing worth looking at, made denial impossible. They ducked into the courtyard of the Golden Scorpion, a high-walled inn where the air smelled faintly of orange blossoms. The owner, a thin man with a too-wide smile, bowed them inside and led them to a private room. But Leila's skin prickled. Something felt wrong. When the tea came, Adrian poured for her first. His eyes never left hers as she lifted the cup. She had just brought it to her lips when the faintest shimmer in the liquid caught the candlelight. Her fingers froze. "Poison," she set the cup down slowly. "Adrian," she whispered. Too late, he had already taken a swallow of his own. The change was instant. He staggered, clutching the table. Leila was on her feet in an instant, catching him before he fell. The owner was gone. The door slammed. Heavy bolts locked from the outside. She pressed her hand to Adrian's cheek, feeling the heat already building under his skin. "Stay with me," she ordered, panic threatening to shred her composure. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, but even then, his hand found her wrist. "Don't let them take you." Her throat tightened. "I'm not leaving you." His lips curved faintly. "Good, because I'm not done kissing you yet." It would have been almost funny if he wasn't dying. The sound of boots echoed in the corridor. Whoever had arranged this was coming for her now. Leila's eyes hardened. She leaned down and kissed him deep, desperate, as if she could breathe her own strength into him before she stood, blade in hand. "Whoever's behind that door," she said through clenched teeth, "is about to regret it." The bolts on the door rattled. Leila stood between Adrian and the entrance, her dagger flashing in the candlelight. Her breath was steady, but inside, her heart was a war drum. The wood splintered. 3 armed men burst through, their faces masked, blades drawn. They didn't get far. Leila moved like a desert storm, fast, unrelenting. Steel met steel, sparks flying. She ducked a strike, slashed across a thigh, pivoted, and slammed the hilt of her dagger into a skull. By the time the last man hit the floor, the only sound left was Adrian's uneven breathing. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Adrian, stay with me." His skin was pale, sweat slicking his temples. "Leila, you should have run." "Shut up," she said fiercely, tearing a strip from her sleeve and soaking it in water to wipe his face. "You don't get to leave me. Not after this." "You care, more than you admit," he murmured, eyes fluttering. She met his gaze, raw and unguarded. "I love you, damn you. I love you, and if you die, I swear I'll drag you back just to yell at you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then I'll have to live, if only to hear you yell again." From her belt, she pulled a small vial of desert night bloom extract, an antidote she'd kept since her days with the veil. She pressed it to his lips, forcing him to drink. Minutes felt like hours before the color began to return to his cheeks. When he could finally sit up, she let out a shaky breath and cupped his face in her hands. "If you ever scare me like that again, I'll kill you myself." He leaned forward, forehead resting against hers. "Noted." Then he kissed her, no hesitation, no restraint, like the whole world was burning around them and they had only this moment to live. And in a way, it was true. By dawn, they were gone from Kashira, riding into the horizon. The silk veil had fallen. But their bond, sealed in blood, danger, and desire, was unbreakable. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And this time, neither would run.